So this is it. This is hour number 4. I don't know how many people are still left alive, but they overwhelmed us. There was just too many of them. But I'm just going to have to be brave, and I'm going to have to get out there and face them. Otherwise, this week's episode is just not going to get done, and we can't have that. So please, wish me luck, and I'll hopefully see you on the other side. I can't see any of them, that's good. What was that?
Hello everyone, welcome to the Re-Review, the series where I get to replay and reassess games from my favourite gaming era. I'm Brian, also known as UK Gen Zoidberg, and if you're new to our channel, you might not be aware that I used to write reviews for Amiga Action magazine. That puts me in the unique position of being able to look back at all of my old reviews and find out whether or not they're still valid all these years later. It's not a question of whether I was right or wrong first time around, more of an insight into whether my opinions have changed in all of these years, and if so, how have they changed? In this episode, we're going to be going all the way back to January 1992 to take a look at my review for Space Gun, which was converted to the Amiga by Images and published by Ocean Software. One of the things that upsets me about modern gaming is the sad demise of the light gun shooter. Aside from going to an actual arcade and a few notable VR titles, nobody really makes games like this anymore. Going right back to Duck Hunt on the NES, some of my favourite gaming memories have come from the genre, and no trip to Arcade Club is complete without a point-blank contest. While Duck Hunt successfully managed to bring the idea of a carnival shooting gallery into the home, the success of movies such as Rambo and Commando, featuring a virtually indestructible one-man army taking out swathes of enemies, it meant that something entirely different was coming our way very soon, in the shape of Taito's Operation Wolf. I can vividly remember seeing the Operation Wolf arcade cabinet for the first time, sandwiched between Data East Robocop and Sega's Enduro Racer. I remember being blown away by the large enemy sprites and action-packed gameplay, not to mention the huge plastic Uzi attached to the front of the cabinet. It was a massive hit, even going on to win the Golden Joystick for Best Game in 1988. And it kicked off a boom in similar action titles over the next few years. Aside from its own sequel, Operation Thunderbolt, which came a year later, there were a number of other notable releases. Sega brought us Line of Fire, which also catered for 2 players and had some impressive 3D rotation effects. SNK's Beastbusters added a 3rd player, and it introduced everybody's favourite cannon fodder, Zombies. All of these games were converted to the Amiga over the years, with varying degrees of success. Taito's Space Gun arrived in the arcades in 1990, with the Amiga conversion coming in early 1992 courtesy of Images software. Images had produced the Amiga version of Beastbusters earlier that same year, and if you want to know more about them, I did a profile of them when I covered Shadow Dancer in an earlier episode of the Re-Review. It was one of a handful of games to be compatible with the Trojan Phaser light gun, and the reviews suggested that it was easily the best one too. People who I know who did use the gun said that it was an impressive piece of hardware that just needed more games like Space Gun in order to be a success. Sadly, those games never arrived. Light gun games got another boost of popularity in the late 90s with the arrival of Time Crisis on the PlayStation 1, which came bundled with its own gun controller for only £10 more than a game would usually cost. Dreamcast owners in Europe and Japan also got their own light gun controller for games such as Virtual Cop, House of the Dead 2 and Confidential Mission. As gamers everywhere began to swap their CRT screens for LCD and plasma, the light gun genre began to die off, with only a few notable exceptions on the Nintendo Wii and PlayStation Move. Earlier in 2023, Taito released Operation Wolf Returns First Mission, a brand new entry in the series. Although it's available on most current systems, It's the Quest and PSVR2 versions that are easily the best, and if you have either of those systems, it's well worth checking out. Now though, it's time to check out my original review of Space Gun, and see what I thought of it first time around. My review of Space Gun appeared in issue 39 of GamesX magazine, where it not only adorned the cover, but it was also our Game of the Week. Other Amiga games that we covered in the same issue were Elvira 2, Fantastic Voyage, and Special Forces from Microprose. We'll talk more about that last one in a future episode. I pointed out that I had not been a fan of Beast Busters, and that this was a massive improvement on the developer's previous attempt at the genre. I also mentioned that this was the first big game to be compatible with the phaser, although I never actually got to try this one out for myself. I expressed my disappointment that this was yet another game where the players were forced to choose between music or sound effects, especially as the Atari ST version had both at the same time. Out of the two, playing with sound effects was definitely my preferred way to play. This is perhaps the best game of the style to appear on the Amiga. The action is fast and furious, and the difficulty level has been set just right. I gave it an overall score of 4.5 X's out of 5, which was enough to earn it an X-rated stamp. Presentation was awarded 17 out of 20, with both lastability and gameplay earning 16 out of 20. Now let's boot the game up again and see if it's worth playing today. It's time for the playtest. So 2039 AD. God, we're nearly there. Oh, okay. It's just going to throw me straight into the action with no warning, right? Okay, let's get playing. So this is instantly smoother at the into the screen sections than Beast Busters was. And the first thing that you'll notice is that you don't actually have to keep topping up your ammo. You have a gun in this one that that will just overheat if you hold down the fire button for too long, and I think that not having to concentrate on how many bullets you've got left means that you can concentrate on what you're shooting instead. While it's not arcade perfect, this is definitely a good interpretation of what the arcade version looks like within the limitations of what the Amiga can do. And what I did mention in my original review is that you can press the spacebar to reverse the direction that you move, like I'm doing here. Which is not something that the game actually tells you in the manual. So I think that must have been something that the PR rep from Ocean probably told me when I was reviewing it. And every single time the game moves forward like that, you get a really long loading pause. That was about 40 seconds. It really is a shame that you have to play with either sound effects or music. Because if you're playing it with the music, then you do miss out on all the atmosphere that the motion tracker is coming with, and you also get to know how close to overheating your gun is by having the sound on as well. All these different weapons that I'm picking up here were ones that you activated in the arcade original by pumping the pump action of the gun that was attached to the cabinet. I do like the fact that you are able to shoot things in the background. I mean, I don't know how much point there is to it, but the fact that you can is always a nice touch. Those loading pauses really do break up the flow. Oh, come on. Ah. Oh no, I have received a fatal wound. One area where these types of games quite often fall down is in the number of credits that they give the player when you're playing them on home computers, meaning that you quite often end up getting too far into the game on your first attempt. And I think this strikes a pretty decent balance on that front, because what it does is it gives you two credits to begin with, and every time you get a certain distance into the game, it will top up the number of credits that you have. So essentially rewarding you for getting to a certain point, and I think that works really nicely. I mean, all games of this type need something, that little something extra that makes them stand out. And like Time Crisis has the ability to duck down behind obstacles. And I think that being able to reverse the direction on this gives it that little edge, because knowing when to do it is actually quite important. It's quite often you can leave the scrolling moving and you'll end up being bombarded by about 4 or 5 aliens at once and die very, very quickly. And obviously you can't do it too often, as there's a constantly ticking clock at the top of the screen, meaning that you have to get to the end of the levels before that runs out. Oh damn! In fairness, that's the fault of the person that was running towards me, not my shooting. Oh, and here we go, the end of level boss. I very much doubt I've got enough health to do this. No, game over. So I think that's probably a good place to leave this playtest. I think I have now played enough of it for to reach my final conclusion, so let's get on with it. As I'm making more and more of these episodes, I'm starting to notice more and more recurring issues with Amiga games, and Space Gun does every single one of them. Does it break up the flow of the action with long loading pauses? Does it throw you straight into the action at the end of those loading pauses without giving you a second to acclimatise yourself? And most common of all, does it force you to choose between music or sound effects? Yes, yes, and yes. Yet, against all the odds, I would still class this as one of the better efforts available. The easiest comparison to make would be to look at Beastbusters, the previous game from the same developer. Whereas that was a jerky mess of horrible colours, this is a pretty decent interpretation of the arcade original. It was absolutely the right decision for the developers to focus their efforts on getting the aliens right, rather than the parallax scrolling backgrounds. As far as I'm concerned, playing with sound effects is by far the best way to play it. It's not that the music is bad, it's just that there is an actual gameplay advantage to playing with the sound, and being able to hear your motion tracker and gauge when your gun is about to overheat. It's just a major disappointment that the game forces you to choose between them. As far as the Super League for on-rail shooters on the Amiga goes, Space Gun sits happily in second place, just behind Probe's version of T2, the arcade game. I'll go into these rankings in more detail in a full video next week. Make sure you come back and watch it. As for the score, I think I'd knock it down from the 4.5 that I gave it originally. It's still a very enjoyable arcade shooter, but with all the flaws, I don't think I could give it more than 7 out of 10 today. Thank you for watching this episode of the Re-Review. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, and this is your first episode, then we have all previous episodes right here in a playlist, which you'll be able to click on in a moment. All opinions expressed in this video are entirely mine and not those of the UK Gaming Network team, so if you disagree with anything that I've said, please let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to hear your opinions. I'm going to be back in 2 weeks' time with another re-review, and the music that's playing in the background right now is a little hint as to the game I'm going to be playing. Can you work out what it is? If you enjoy our videos and you want to show your support to the channel, then please do like and subscribe, and don't forget that super thanks are also available if you want to use them. You can also follow me over on Twitter at UKJaneZoidberg to find out what games I'm currently playing. Until next time, happy retro gaming. Bye for now.